Yeah, hey mom. Hi. I got a call back from my agent about The Walking Dead. Yeah, they want me to be the replacement for Rick. Yeah, do you want to hear the line? Okay. Carl, get over here. I know, good, right? Yeah. Thanks so much. Welcome to Module 7, Lecture 17 for Introduction to International Relations. This lecture is primarily going to cover Robert Gilpin's article for this module. So Gilpin talks about trying to understand this concept of political economy. And he says there are a couple of different puzzles that political economy has been trying to wrangle with since its inception. One is that on the one hand, there's increasing economic interdependence between states, which makes national boundaries kind of irrelevant, if you think about globalization, for example. On the other hand, if we look at most forms of political organization, the nation state is still the primary decision-making unit. So if you look at organizations like the United Nations or international treaties that might emerge, states are the parties that sign on to these organizations or institutions, which means that they're still important when we think about who are the most important actors in international affairs. There's another puzzle as well, and that is that on the one hand, politics determines economic activity, as exemplified here by the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement by President Bill Clinton, which brought together the United States, Canada, and Mexico into one international trade, free trade bloc. So what happens in politics can affect the economic realm. On the other hand, economic process reconfigures our notions of power. Because of globalization, because of technology, we have seen new kinds of actors emerge that may wield outsized influence compared to even some nation states. For example, this guy, Mark Zuckerberg. What he does in terms of the direction that he takes Facebook has impact on politics, right? If we think about privacy policy or the ability of multinational corporations to market themselves to millions and millions of people, what he decides, along with the people who work for Facebook, will shape our ability to communicate. And so in some ways, you might argue that Mark Zuckerberg has more effect on our day-to-day lives than even some nation states. So another thing that Gilpin deals with is trying to understand what are the most important constituent elements of political economy so that we can arrive at a definition or understanding of the concept that meets the reality on the ground. And so he says that on the one hand, if you look at the work by Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye, they talk about two domains, right? Economics and politics as being these sort of discrete aspects of social life. Economics refers to short-term allocative behavior, and politics refers to the establishment of structures and institutions. But for Gilpin, this kind of essentializes these two without exploring the dynamics between them. And so what he prefers is a description of economics in terms of wealth and politics in terms of power. And so wealth, what he is trying to do here is create an operational definition of political economy that more closely approximates how it affects our lives. So wealth is anything that can generate future income, and it's composed of physical assets and human capital. And then on the other side, you have power, which refers to man's control over the minds and actions of other men. And so Gilpin argues that wealth and power are better approximations of political economy than the more broad and abstract ideas embodied in economics and politics. So Cohen and Nye focus on these two, but Gilpin argues that if we want a better definition of political economy, we should use an operational one that looks at more fine-grained aspects of economics and politics, which are related, wealth and power. And so Gilpin continues to describe different conceptions or theories relating to political economy. We've already covered two of these in a previous lecture, but I also wanted to add in now a third one, which we've also talked about when we looked at social theories and international relations in general. And so what he very smartly does is to distinguish between liberalism, Marxism, and mercantilism by virtue of their nature of economic relations, the nature of the actors themselves, the goal of economic activity, the relationship between economics and politics, and then how things change under this particular conception. So with liberalism, the argument is that economic relations are generally harmonious or peaceful, and that the major actors here are households and firms. The goal of economic activity is to make everyone better off. So this is the maximization of global welfare. And in terms of the relationship between economics and politics, under a liberal mindset, economics should determine politics, right? And as we learned from a few lectures ago, the idea is that more free trade should lead to more peaceful relations. So the more that we focus on interdependence and the economic relations between states, the more that should impact the politics that we see in our daily lives. And the theory of change is one of dynamic equilibrium, and that is to say that there's a changing role of different actors based on their economic wealth and their relationships with other states. So there is this quest for equilibrium, right? Getting back to my old scale here, but that equilibrium might change, right? It might change depending on who the actors are at any given moment. But the idea is that ultimately we will see the establishment of equilibrium, even if we're talking about these kind of different phases of it. Then we look at Marxism. And for Marxists, the nature of economic relations, as you might suspect, would be viewed as conflictual. Again, you've got the workers and you've got the capital-owning class, and they're constantly in tension because the capital-owning class is working to exploit the workers. So the nature of the actors themselves, actors that are most important to Marxists are not states necessarily, but economic classes. The goal of economic activity, again, it's sort of viewed with a skeptical mindset here, is the maximization of class interests. So the bourgeoisie, the capital-owning class, they want to become as wealthy as possible. Whereas for the workers or the proletariat, they simply want to be equal. And so the goal of the economic activity, because it's different between these two groups, means that it will necessarily lead to conflict between them. And so whether we like it or not, according to Marxists, economics does determine politics. So those who have money wield a lot of influence in the political process, and they game the system to allow themselves to enrich themselves at the expense of the workers. And so in terms of change, there's a tendency toward disequilibrium because we constantly have this lack of balance between the workers and the capital-owning class. So something needs to happen, argue Marxists, in order for an equilibrium to emerge, and that is, right, the overthrow of the capital-owning class and the emergence of a classless society eventually. And then finally, we have, again, mercantilists, who also argue that the nature of economic relations is conflictual, but for reasons that are different from the ones argued by Marxists. For here, actors are nation states, and what they want to do, kind of in line with realism, is to maximize their national interests. And the way that they should go about doing that, of course, is to enrich their states and use that money, funnel it into their military so that they can challenge other states for supremacy in the international system. And so the relationship here between economics and politics is that politics determines economics. So the role of individual states and the hierarchy between them, that's what determines the economic capacity of other states because they are only able to do what the most powerful states will let them do. And in terms of change, there are shifts in the distribution of power. We don't necessarily over time have one hegemon or a multipolar system. It evolves over time. So that means that the distribution of power will never be the same for any long period of time. And what can change are the relative capabilities of these states, which is strengthened by their abilities to continue to gain economic ground by going to other parts of the world, exploiting labor, exploiting natural resources, and again, using that money to strengthen their own militaries, which they then use to demonstrate their ability to be stronger than other states that are competing with them. So a concrete example that we might look at to apply these different conceptions and also to understand Gilpin's conception of political economy in general as being comprised of wealth and power is or can be seen in the example of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which, as I mentioned, was an agreement between the governments of the United States, Canada, and Mexico to lower trade barriers to allow free trade between them. So, which conception of political economy do you think best describes the relationship between politics and economics? And then once you have that in mind, watch a video which I have linked here on the slide as well as in the module itself, and to think about, has NAFTA been good or bad for international trade? What about the 3 member countries? What about other actors? Labor groups, environmental groups, for example. So watch the NAFTA at 20 video, and as you watch it, think about these 2 questions.